Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining my session. I hope you're having a great time. Okay, so my talk's titled Build, Consume, Repeat. And if you've not already read the abstract of this, let's explore it while I talk about it. So, my name is Nishu Goel. I work as an engineer at a company called the DataWorks. Most of my work revolves around front end technologies like React or Angular. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies and Angular. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and I've written this book called Step by Step Angular Routing, which focuses on the different topics inside Angular routing. All right, so the next 15 minutes looks mostly like this. We are going to start off with talking about what are web components, why do we need web components, and we'll finally build one web component using Angular elements and then consume it inside a React project. So that's why the title build, consume, and then you're going to repeat the process when you understand the importance of building a component as a reusable thing, and then just be able to pick it up from there and then apply it wherever you want to. And let's start off with understanding the state of web currently. So if you are, working with web a lot, you would know how we just create the view as so many different parts, so many different, smaller views into one view. And those views basically can be created as components, as reusable components, which we could then pick from there and then, maybe use on other views. For example, a carousel component, which has, many different products listing inside that, or maybe, just some items inside that carousel. And you really like that carousel, which is there on the home page. But you also want to show that on the shopping cart page, for example, the cart page, for example, wherein you want to tempt the user, tempt the customer that, maybe at the cart page, he would still buy something from here. So that's kind of the idea of, having reusable components, which you could place at many different places and not having to create them from scratch everywhere. So with this reusability with the components that we create, what if you could actually create a component that you really like as a reusable component and then just be able to pick it, produce a bundle out of it, and then use that bundle anywhere, not just in your current application which you were doing just now, but in different applications also, in different projects also, which can be based out of different frameworks, right? What if you could, for example, this first framework project wherein you see this, red background and there's this teacup in this, and you really like that, and you want to pick it up and place it inside this other framework project of yours. What if you could just, create a bundle of this particular component, pick it up from here, and just place this bundle inside this other project, which let's assume is a React project. And after you place the bundle that you just created inside this React project, you should be just able to see that as you place the custom element for that, as you place the selector for this particular component. That's the ideal scenario, right? So that's kind of what web components allow us to do. And if you look at the more official definition of what web components are, it basically says that it's a set of web platform APIs that help us to create custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags, and we could then use those in web pages and across web applications. And there are certain web component specifications that a web component should follow, and let's talk about those now. So there are basically three web component specifications that a web component follows, which is HTML template, shadow DOM, custom elements, and then there's something called HTML imports also, which was earlier a web component specification, but now no more. So let's talk about these one by one. HTML template is basically confining your web component inside the template tags, just like we have NgTemplate in Angular, and it will basically ensure that your code only renders when you actually use the component, when it actually connects to the DOM inside the browser. Then you have shadow DOM, which ensures that your custom element that you create is encapsulated. It doesn't leak the styles or the DOM nodes outside of your web component or vice versa. And then we have custom elements, which is the most important web component specification. And this basically ensures that whatever web component you are writing, whatever the custom element it is, it always has to register with the browser, because if browser does not know what your selector, which is maybe called my-reusable-component, if the browser doesn't understand it, it will simply ignore it, and among all the other divs and h1 tags, it will just ignore your my reusable component. So it needs to be registered with the DOM, with the browser. The browser needs to understand what this custom element is and what it should basically show when you are rendering that in the DOM. So HTML imports, now it was mainly about importing documents within documents, and due to problems like multiple imports and the priority of those imports, it was not supported by all the browsers, and it's not anymore a web component specification. Now, this is an interesting website which basically tells you about the compatibility of frameworks with respect to creating web components, and it's an interesting, place to be if you're actually looking for options which framework to use when you're trying to create your web components, or just create an application with multiple web components. So you can go to this. And now let's look at a more different approach, which is about creating a custom element. So first of all, you need to define what your custom element should do, right? So it's a simply class for a web component that you're trying to create, a custom element that you're trying to create, which would be just like an HTML element. It should extend the HTML element, because it will be just another element, just like other tag, just like we have div and h1 in the browser. So once you have the business logic written for your web component or for your custom element, you then want to register it with the browser. That's when you use the define method of the custom elements API, which basically tells that, hey, this is the selector that you need to use that will be given to the browser. You tell the browser that this is the selector that you will get, and this is what you have to render in place of this particular selector. So if you see something called ng-search-bar, this is the component that you have to render. What is that component? Search bar component. What is search bar component? This class that you created right here, this is the search bar component, and the logic written inside this is the logic that will, is the view that will show on the browser. So that's how you define a custom element. Now, a custom element also has some reactions. It's exactly like a component's life cycle. And when you register it with the browser and it connects to the browser, you get the connected callback method, which is invoked. It basically means that it has been attached to the DOM. Your custom element has been attached to the DOM. When it's removed from the DOM, then you invoke this connected callback. This is the method that invokes then. So it works exactly like you have, your component lifecycle hooks, ng-on init, ng-on destroy. And just among other things, just like we have reactions like lifecycle hooks, we have properties like we have input binding in Angular for retrieving the properties, or for events, we have output. Similarly, in here, we have custom events, and then we have attributes, which are like, you can compare it with host binding when you deal with directives in Angular. And this is basically how you're able to carry your favorite functionality from one framework to other. And for example, you really like forms in Angular, and you want to carry that form validation from Angular to React. You could do that using a web component. It just needs to be more advanced. And this is another important thing when you're dealing with web components, which is polyfills. So to ensure that you add polyfills, if everything in your code is working, but then you still don't see your view, which you should see when you're working with web components, just give a check. Maybe polyfills are missing. So that's kind of a very important part in the process of creating web components. And let's look at a general way of creating web components. So everybody uses Polymer a lot when creating web components, right? And lit element is one of the tools that people use to create web components. And this is a very simple way of creating a regular web component using lit element. So it basically you're basically doing the same thing here. You have created a class which is called simple greeting, in which you are getting a property. First of all, you're doing a property binding here, name, which is getting its value from, in this case, you're just giving it the value world here. And this is property binding happening in here. And you see how this class is decorated with the decorator custom element. And that's where you're given the selector simple-greeting. So that's where you give the selector for your custom element that you're creating. And then inside the render method, you could, write all your HTML, all the view that you want for your custom element. And now the selector that you have given inside the custom element decorator is what we can use on different UIs or different views to see if our custom element is working. So you use simple hyphen greeting in, as you can see in the second block, and then you have to pass the name property because that's what is property binding that's happening in here. So instead of world, you pass everyone, and now the UI would say hello space everyone instead of hello space world, because now the name's value is everyone, which is coming from the place where you are using the simple greeting tag, the custom element. And now let's look at how we can create web components in Angular. And for this, I have a whole demo for all of us. So let's jump right in. All right, so I have created a project called JsPoland, and it's a regular Angular application. So if we just view what is inside, it's a regular Angular application with just root component, which is the app component. So let's just open this application in here, inside the code. And the idea is that we want to convert the app component into a web component. So let's do that first of all. Let's check how our app component looks like right now. Yeah, so this is our app component, very basic. Let's just get rid of the HTML file because we don't want to have a separate file for the HTML for it, because we are anyway going to bundle this component. So instead of using template URL and a separate file in here, I want to simply write the HTML here, which is my component view that I want to show. And in here, we simply create our web component, which says maybe inside an h1 tag. Yeah, so this basically says my Angular web component. And now in here, we want to be sure with, we want to basically keep it configurable as for the consuming application that will be using it. So in this case, it is Angular, but it might change when the consuming application is React, for example. So let's just keep it configurable. And there's this variable which is called framework. And its value currently is Angular, but it can change depending on the consuming application. So right now it's called my Angular web component because the value for framework is Angular basically, right? Okay, and let's just get rid of selector because we are anyway going to define the selector for our custom element and register it with the browser. Cool, so this is how our web component looks like. This is basically a single line of code which says that this is the web component. And there's a property binding happening here, which basically gives it the property value from the consuming application. All right. Now we need to register it with the browser. We need to define it as a custom element. We have not done that yet. It's a regular Angular component as of now. So let's go to app.module.ts. We have already declared the component that we're trying to use. We have browser module in the imports array. We don't want any bootstrapping of any component at the start of the application, because we want to bootstrap it, we want to launch the component only when we have created one. So when you want to do some manual bootstrapping, that's when you can use ng bootstrap. And what this basically will help us to do is we can create the custom element at the very start and the bootstrapping of our application, and then define it or register it with the browser. So first of all, we need to, we need to register our Angular component as a web component. For that, we need a package called Angular Elements. So Angular Elements is basically Angular's way of creating web components. So let's add that. Now there are two ways to do that. You could do ng @Angular Elements, which is like this. Now this would add a lighter polyfill, which is for browser support, but it doesn't have like a good support for all the different browsers, doesn't consider all the browsers. So you could simply do npm install and npm install @Angular/elements. This will not add any polyfills, but then you can go ahead and later manually add the polyfills that you want to add, which ensure that all the browsers are supported. So right now we are simply installing Angular Elements. We also need to install web components and custom elements. So we'll install those as well. The next thing that we need to install is the web components package. So we do npm install @web components /web components.js. So we install this. And when this is installed, you would install @web components /custom elements, so that we have all the required packages related to web components, custom elements, and Angular's way of doing it, which is Angular elements. So let's wait for this to install. So now the third thing that we need to install is web components /custom elements. So let's just remove this, but custom elements. So once we have all these three packages installed, the next thing to take care of is to add polyfills. So I'll simply copy these two polyfills from in here and just close this. So let's go to the polyfill section inside src, which is this. Now, instead of having Angular elements add the polyfills for you, what you instead do is that add the polyfills manually. One is the native shim polyfill from your web components custom elements, and the second is the custom elements mil polyfill. So you have added these two, which would ensure that you have all the browser support needed for your web component and custom elements, and you have your web component ready, but we need to register it with the DOM. So in the ngDo bootstrap method, the first thing that you need to do is create your custom element first of all. So let's call it const custom element, or let's just call it custom ele equals. Now is when you use the create custom element method, which comes from the Angular elements package. As you see, it auto imported in here. So it comes from Angular elements package, and create custom element basically takes in two parameters. First is the component that you're creating as a web component. In this case, we are just creating the app component as a custom component, which is a web component. And then if you want any dependency injection inside your, inside your custom element, you could simply do that. So the injector could be this dot injector, and then you could define it inside the constructor in here, constructor. And then you can define your injector, which is of type injector, and basically just import it from the Angular core package from here. Right, so you have this imported here, the injector is taken care of, and I think this should work. So it's just this dot injector. And something like this, okay? Once you've done that, you want to now use the custom element define method to register this with the DOM. So custom elements.define, what do you want to define? First of all, you need to give the selector, right? So let's give the selector as JsPoland. So this is what we register with the browser. This is the one that is going to be used as a selector in the DOM, and which will load the custom ele, which is our custom element. So when we use JsPoland as something like this, that's when we load our component, which is the app component, whatever logic we have written inside that. So everything looks good. Now with the earlier versions of Angular, we also needed to specify our web component inside the entry components array, but we don't need to do anymore all of that, because we don't need to specify a component as an entry component. Every component is basically considered as an entry component, right? So we don't have to do that. We have bootstrapped our component, and you want to check if this is working. But how would you check? This is like Angular would still consider it as an Angular component. How would you check if it is working as a web component? In that case, you could simply go to your index.html, get rid of this app root, which is basically what bootstraps the app root. And instead of this, you can now specify the new selector that you've given for your app component, which is your web component. And in here, you would just write JS-Poland. Sorry, that's done. All right, let's have a look if this is working, or do we need to add anything else also. So we need to compile it quickly. Let's compile this and check if this is working properly. Let's just say yes. So this is compiled successfully. But one thing that we missed here is in this one is that we didn't do property binding here, right? So this needs to come as an input property. Let's just define the input decorator, which will ensure that property binding is happening. We were just interpolating the framework value, but not binding the property. So it is auto imported here from Angular core. This should work now. So it's compiled already. Let's just check if this is working. If we go to the index.html once again, we can see that we have removed this and this is working. All right. So let's go in here. And this seems to be working fine. What is the next step? So in this process, the next step is to, after finally checking that it's working, the next step is to build the package and just pack it, right? So let's go to our terminal. First of all, we need to add ngxbuild+, which is the library that we'll use to build it. So add ngxbuild+. You could add this. After you add this library, the next thing is to prepare a build script. So let's go to the package.json, and I have already created it here. So the build script basically will build your web component for production, and you want to pass the single bundle flag because you want a single bundle created for a web component, and you just pass it as true. So you should be able to then run your build web component script and then build a bundle of your web component. So you can see that you have added I have it already installed, but you can add your ngxbuild+. So now let's simply run npm run and the build web comp and build our web component that we're trying to create a bundle of. Once this happens, we would simply want to pack the bundle that we just created because that's the packet that we'll publish to npm. So let's wait for this to build completely. And this does take quite some time. So let's wait for this. And as we can see, it has created 3 different files for us. Main.js file, which is the single bundle file that we need, and other polyfill related or style related files. We can now pack our library and publish it to npm. So let's just go inside the build folder and use the npm pack command to pack our library. So let's do npm pack. Wait for it to pack our library. It seems to have a problem. So it says that it does not have a package.json file. So we need to define that first of all inside our dist folder. So let's go in here, just close the spec file. Yeah, inside the JsPoland dist folder, let's create a package.json. And inside this, we just need to define 2 things mainly: the name of the package that we are sending, which is @Nishu Goel / let's call it JsPoland.com, and let's give it a version. So the version can be the first version, which is 0.0.1, right? So that's our package.json, and now we should be able to npm pack it. So let's see, since it's able to find the package.json file now, and you can see that it created a tgz file for us, and we want to simply publish it to npm. But let me first check if I'm logged into npm. So I would just do who am I, and it says that I'm logged in. So let's just do npm publish and then the name of the file and the access flag as public because I want to publish it publicly. Not that. Access public. So yeah. So this should now publish my component to the npm registry. Let's wait for that, and it says that it has published it, and now we should be able to use this inside a React application. We could go to npm and check if this is published, but yeah. And I would go inside my packages, look for this particular component, and I can see that it is already in here. So yeah, this is my component that is published now, and I'll just create a script for this, but which can be an unpackaged script in here. I think it is this. Yeah. So we can create any script for our web component. Before that, let's just create a React application first of all to be able to use our web component inside that. So if you do not have Create React App installed, you could simply use npx to do that. Let's go inside this folder and do npx create React app. You could also do CRA and then the name of your consuming application, consume app, right? So let's just call it consume app. And when this application gets created, you should then be able to use your web component that you just published to npm inside this particular application. And in the meantime, we could just prepare the script that we need. So it's unpackit.com then is the name of your package, which in this case is JsPoland.com the version, which is the first version in our case. So 0.0.1 / the file name. The single bundle file that we need is main.js file. So this is the script that we want to use inside our React application. And this is still building, so let's wait for this to build. And then we will simply place the script inside the index.html. So our app is created successfully. Let's just go inside our consume application now. And now basically there are two things that we need to do. One, we need to import it as a script inside our React application. And second, just use the selector and pass the property. So first of all, let's just pick the script that we created in here, which is this one, and place it inside the index.html of our React application. So let's just go to the body of our React application. And inside this, we could just paste in the script. So it should be script src equals this, and just close it and script in here. All right, so now we need to use the selector inside the app.js file. So let's just get rid of this unnecessary code that is in here. Our custom element is called Js-Poland. That's what we have called it. So Js-Poland. And we need to also specify the property, which is framework equals whatever you want to pass in from here. Let's give it capital R. So this is the framework that we have given, and now it should simply load into the browser. So let's compile our React application now and hope that it works, because we had to do only main two things, which we have done. We have defined the selector, we have given it a property, we have also imported the script that we needed. All right, so let's wait for this to compile now, and then we should be able to check our React application, which will be running on 3000. And as we can see, it's compiled successfully. Let's just go to this URL and check if it's working properly. So now it should basically show the React logo and also our React component. So you see how we were able to replace it as per the consuming application with property binding. And this is exactly the same component that we created using Angular elements. So you see how you could create your Angular component or any other framework component and then use it inside any other framework. So yeah, that's how you're able to add your carry your favorite framework functionality to other framework. So now let's go back to the slides, and these are some of the links that I've attached that could be helpful to you in the process of creation of your web component. So this is the Codelab, which basically tells you the whole process and guides you through the process of creating your web component. This is the repository link wherein you can create a search bar component, for example, as a reusable component. And then if you struggle with using it inside a React application or in a vanilla JavaScript application, these are some of the repositories that can help you with that. So in the end, I would just like to thank you all very much. And these are some of the resources that you could follow if you're working and want to dive deeper into what web components are. So yeah, thank you very much. You can connect with me on Twitter on this username, and you can also read my blog at unravelweb.dev. Thank you very much.